Tighten up, leaders. Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the show that drills into the foundations of what leadership is all about. I'm your producer and co-host, Hali Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duran.
Join us as we sit down with leaders from across the country to mine for nuggets of wisdom.
All right, everyone, welcome into the meeting room. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership because this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I'm the host, Billy Duran, and I'm in the meeting room today with Hali Gibson, our producer and co-host. Hali, this is going to be a great episode, but I'm anxious to hear what's your leadership nugget of the week.
Well, I'm really excited about this leadership nugget because it comes from one of our internal team members, McKinley Lane, out of our Chattanooga branch. And we had all of our inside sales team come in for a 2-day training. And everyone chose their seat day one. It was a fantastic training. It was day 2 that the nugget comes from, which was McKinley, who loves people. She is a fantastic people person. She was the only person in the meeting, day 2, to choose a different seat. And when we asked her kind of, why did you decide to do that? She said, well, I sat next to people and got to meet them day 1. I wanted to meet new people on day 2. And I think that that is a great lesson to learn, in that you can intentionally put yourself in new spaces to learn about new people or to, make yourself a little uncomfortable, that get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Very good. I remember that. I remember McKinley doing that. So, Hali, today we have not only one of my mentors, one of my coaches, one of my heroes in my career, Rick Scruggs. Rick Scruggs is the founder and CEO of Financial Designs in Lynchburg, Virginia. Rick, welcome to the podcast.
Billy, Hali, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hali, Rick was the architect of Threaded Faster's ESOP, and Rick came along in our company's journey and walked with us through this transition into employee ownership. And it was one of those things. I remember Rick kind of getting grabbed me by the belt and throw me into the deep end of the pool when we started talking about employee ownership and new responsibilities in my world. And I'm so grateful that you were there to walk with me through that. When Rick was wanted to create Financial Designs, was to create a cornerstone for financial guidance, a member of the National Center for Employee Ownership and the ESOP Association, a strategic coach, a qualifying member of the $1 Million Roundtable. And today, Financial Designs is recognized leader in the business continuity, succession planning, transition, and exit planning. And we talked a little more about that during the podcast. Talented team of advisors and support staff that work with business owners and the employees. But as we were talking before, Hali, Rick has such a deep well of resources, friend, mentor, coach. He first introduced me to the idea that there is a time to think. And we're going to get to explore a little bit about that with him today. Just recently published a book called What's Wrong with My Thinking? How Abundant Thinking Creates a Better Outcome. So, Rick, it was interesting, even knowing you as long as I have, going back and reading your bio. And there were some events early on in your life that sort of set the path for you. And so as we get started, I'd like for you to tell our audience a little bit about how that impacted your life and then what ultimately led to what you're still doing today.
Very good. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, in 1973, on Christmas Eve morning, my father died of a heart attack playing tennis. That was his true love. He played tennis frequently, and I never quite picked up the game to his skill set. And it was a time that, you're 18 years old, you're finishing your first semester in college, but it really took almost an additional 3 years to fully grasp why I didn't have to borrow money, why my mother was able to maintain the house. She continued to be a librarian until she was 65. And it was that financial integrity that they practiced after World War II. When he returned from Europe, he landed at Normandy about 10 days late because that morning of June 6th, his boat engine didn't start, but he made up for it in the Battle of the Bulge, which began on December 16th and lasted for 40 days as the largest land battle in the history of the world. So what happens is when you have these events in your life, it sometimes takes a long time to process. But once I began to understand financial security, financial independence, collaboration with advisors, CPAs, attorneys, bankers, coaches, etc., I realized that there was a big gap. People tended to operate in silos. People were not called into an owner's office on a quarterly basis to have conversations. So I think that experience with my father, although it was emotionally disruptive, because our family was able to remain intact, I said, I want to go out. This ought to be easy. Everybody would want to get their financial affairs, or what we like to refer to as house in good order. The challenge is, human beings, we all think we have plenty of time, so we'll get around to it tomorrow or next week or next year. So a good friend of mine recently in 2024 was diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And his initial response is, I don't have time for this. And the irony is, we're all here for a very short visit on the blue planet, and mortality is still 100%. And he said, had he not been a part of a firm and an organization and a team, not only would his family have suffered, but his clients would have suffered. So getting your house in good order is, I think, a responsibility that we all bear, and it's not to be taken lightly.
Well, Rick, I can tell you this, when there was a time when in our journey, in Threaded Fastener's journey, and Frank and Steve began to think about, what they were going to do, and ultimately the relationship that Frank had with Darryl Bryant, and then bringing you in and connecting our teams together, it was just a cornerstone decision for Frank. And I believe, and we've talked a lot about this on the podcast, for him, that exit plan for him, but part of that exit plan was the legacy that he wanted to leave in transferring ownership and helping the employees that had helped him build this organization. So Rick, when we're talking about employee ownership, and I know that you're very involved in that space, you were our architect, but we often have companies ask us, how do you become an ESOP? How do you get to that space? What would be your advice to someone who might be listening in? Maybe it's an owner thinking about an exit plan. What's the steps towards employee ownership?
Well, first, I think you have to recognize that it's not a decision to be entered into lightly. Any type of transition or exit or succession, you want a nice runway of 2, 3, 4, even 5 years. And then employee stock ownership plans, which were legislated in 1974 under ERISA, so they just had their 50th anniversary, and there's only 7,000 ESOPs in the country, where there could be 600,000 or more. And the reason for it is the tax law encourages people to look at and installing an ESOP, but it's the complexity that sometimes keeps them away. The owners teams that we've seen embrace the employee stock ownership plan, they want to remain locally owned. They want that the jobs that they've created to remain locally owned. They don't want to sell out to a third party who they don't really know. And this idea of creating additional capitalists in a capitalist system is what makes the ESOP work so well. So it's somebody who is open-minded and coachable to explore not just one avenue of continuity, succession, transition, and exit, but wants to have the whole smorgasbord explained to them, and then that breaks down the complexity.
So, Rick, we had Corey Rosen on, was the founder of the NCEO, on our podcast several episodes ago, and it was interesting. Corey brought this up because this question comes up when I'm talking to business owners thinking about this. Is the fair market value out there in coming to value for the employee ownership model similar or equal to what private equity's out there doing now? Are those numbers getting closer to being the same, or is there a disparity? I think that some owners might say, hey, I'm not sure I can get what this business of what I think is worth out here with the employee ownership model. Maybe there's something else. Is there some balance to that now? Is it coming to where the numbers are closer?
Great question, Billy. The issue is that a strategic buyer is always going to pay more because they want that company for a strategic purpose in their growth and model. Private equity, of course, if they're doing a roll-up or aggregating an industry, they're using other people's money. So the private equity group, it's not their money, it's the investors and limited partners. So sometimes they'll pay more. The Department of Labor is very clear. They want this to be an arm's length transaction on the valuation side. So although an owner sometimes thinks that valuation might be under the market, it can be cleaner, it can be crisper, and they can also have an opportunity to reward their employees who took them on the journey.
So, Rick, I'm just thinking a little bit more along the ESOP model here. What separates, in your opinion, you've seen a lot of them, what separates a good ESOP, an employee stock option company? What separates a good employee-owned company, one from thriving or one not? What do you see as those threads of success for employee-owned companies?
Well, I'm going to use two words, leadership, and then an acronym, NETMA. Nobody ever tells me anything. When you look at the heart and soul of a company, what you discover is that communication across the board in all relationships, all organizations, all collaboration is the missing piece to the jigsaw puzzle. So when an owner and the ownership team are willing to embrace open, transparent, non-manipulative communication, you're going to have a win. When you have an abundance mentality instead of a scarcity mentality, everybody wins. Now, do they win overnight? No. It's James Clear's Atomic Habits. It's not having big goals that matters. It's what are your habits and the systems that you're implementing on a daily basis that over time give you the progressive realization of your worthy ideal. So it's the organizations that are open-minded, abundant, and want to grow that win the game.
So, Rick, when you said that acronym, I mean, you lost me for a minute because I can remember working with you on some acronyms before. And I'm over here just cracking up because Hali's writing down as fast as you're writing that acronym. You know, after everybody finishes reading Rick's new book, pick up the book, The Advantage, because that's exactly what The Advantage says. Create a leadership team, create clarity around the vision, and then over-communicate clarity around that vision. And that's the entire model of building a culture of leadership communication. And, of course, we know the Drucker quote is, culture eats strategy for breakfast, and how that works with employee-owned companies. And I know I probably heard that quote from you the very first time. So, Rick, you've been in this industry long enough to see the shifts in retirement planning for ESOP companies, for traditional business models. How's the retirement planning and succession planning shifted over the last 5 or 10 years? And why is succession planning such a critical factor in strategic planning?
Well, succession is really about, do you have a bench? Meaning, do you have a protege plan in place? Because even if you don't do an ESOP, a third-party buyer wants to know who's going to be there to execute. Because if it's all owner-dependent, it's going to collapse. So when you think about retirement, as a company, you contribute 7.65% of all employees pay to Social Security. Your employees have to put up the same amount. That's a one-legged stool. Then you've got a 401k, typically with a match. Now you got a two-legged stool. When you add the ESOP, you've got a three-legged stool. It's more foundationally solid. Employees may not fully understand it because it does take a while for people to get comfortable with it. It depends upon how transparent you are with your operating results and your financials. But it's why ESOP companies outperform non-ESOP companies anywhere from 7 to 10%, according to the NCEO, the National Center for Employee Ownership. And you mentioned Corey Rosen, who's, I've known Corey for 40 years in terms of going to the annual ESOP meetings, et cetera. And it's that performance. As an owner, I think we all want to look back and take pride that we impacted our employees, we impacted our customers, we impacted the quality of life in the communities in which we reside. So the landscape, there's no get rich quick. People pitch that all the time. The single biggest error is owners don't know what their company is worth, they're not viewing it as an asset that's attractive and transferable at any given moment in time. And that's really part of what's changing as the ownership model of 10 million private and family businesses, 80% owned by people over the age of 55. That is a big economic cliff that's staring the U.S. Capitalist system in the next decade.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thought. I think you shared this with me years ago from the succession planning for some owners. They believe that one night the succession ferry is going to float down in and going to give them a whole lot of money. And I mean, it's just one of those things that many owners don't consider. You know, my runway is getting shorter and shorter, and how we plan towards that becomes part of the strategic plan for the organization. And I'm having these flashbacks of all this coaching that you were doing to me early in my career. And Rick, you always reminded us when we were meet, you know, we went over the technicals, sort of the nuts and bolts, no pun intended, of how to do business. But you always came back to the personal side, and you always encouraged us on finding that balance in, you know, what is good, healthy balance in the work life. And we've had a lot of people on our podcast sort of talk about how they navigate, you know, work-life balance, and some struggle with it. They're just completely honest. They just say, I struggle in this area. How do you coach executives and leaders in this area? Is that becoming harder to find that work-life balance today more than ever because of these crazy phones that we take them with us everywhere we go?
Work-life balance is a very challenging term because I don't think it's necessarily possible like a teeter-totter. At any given moment in time, an organization or its people or its employees may have to spend 80, 90% of their time work-related. It's the responsibility of the leadership team to say, you can't do that 24/7. So when people put that extra effort together, then you just back it off. Maybe a week or 2 weeks later, people take off Friday or there's a celebration lunch. We seem to blow through our successes and wallow in what didn't work. And so the idea is, how do you structure your communication to acknowledge to people, I know we're asking you to put in a 60-hour week, or we're asking you to put in a 14-hour day. This is not going to be forever. And we'll recognize the effort down the road.
I'm thinking about some structure around the celebration. You know, next Friday we're going to spend some time thinking about our success. Or next Friday we're going to have a cookout to celebrate this past month's success. It's odd. It seems almost counterintuitive, but as you're talking about it, I'm thinking, you know, we schedule time now down to the nth degree. I mean, we're scheduling meetings to the nth degree. Why don't we build in that time to celebrate the successes? I find myself in some of our meetings, we're all head down and we're always on to what's next. And we fail at times to pause into what's not just now, but what has just happened. Look at the success we just kind of walked through. So I appreciate you bringing us back to that. So Rick, you're a leadership coach. You've been involved in leadership for years. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. So we like to talk about what leadership looks like. So in your own perspective, how have you evolved in leadership thinking over the years? And I really want to come back and ask you some questions about the book in particular, but how has your perspective on leadership evolved?
Well, it's fascinating that leadership is the key ingredient for an owner and for the management team. And actually, it can be for somebody even on the floor. Do we give people the space to grow up, to have a voice? And, you know, I have a personal coach every Friday morning at 7:00, and we talk about leadership. And my level of understanding, I've gone deeper and deeper into it because that is my key function, not only within our organization, but how we communicate with our clients. It's not about being president or CEO or vice president or manager or HR. It's what kind of leadership skills do you have to listen authentically, and before you act, make sure you're acting in the best interest of the organization. And it's not a skill that's earned or learned overnight. You actually have to earn it. And you do that by getting a PhD in mistakes. Nobody just bats 1,000. You can bat 300, you're in the Hall of Fame. So acknowledge that up front, and you're going to have a much better journey.
Yeah, I would tell anyone aspiring to be a CEO, the best training for being a CEO is being a CEO. Some things you just don't know until you get here, and then you don't know what you don't know. So it's been an interesting journey for sure. Rick, when it comes to the book, you were one of those people that probably introduced me to the idea of having time to think. And I think that was back when it was the Time to Think book. Actually, we went through several sessions of that. And then you've just recently written a book called What's Wrong with My Thinking. Tell us a little bit about how you came to, I want to write this. What was the motivation behind it? And then I want to ask you some questions specifically about the book.
So one of my coaches who I had been working with, he was great at asking me questions about, well, you've had all this background, you've had all these experiences. I think writing a book would help communicate that message faster, easier, and with more authority. So he knew about Time to Think, the author Nancy Klein, and what we did is we've said, not only do you have to have time to think, but you have to have the right space, without interruption. Put that phone down, actually maybe leave it in your car. And then when you have a listener and a thinker, the thinker gets to understand that they're not going to be interrupted. They're not going to get any feedback. They're going to be listened to with eyes focused on them. They can go anywhere they want to in the room. And our typical Time to Think session lasts about 70 minutes, whether it's a solo session or a team session. Somebody who you met, one of our clients, that high-end machine shop, first Time to Think session we did with them, the old codger 27-year-old veteran said, I don't know what happened, but this is the first time we've all been in the same room at the same time and listened to what people had to say. I'm all in. And if you look at their trajectory of growth from that day to today, it's been unparalleled.
Well, I'll tell you this, Hali, I've been in those sessions and they are quite intimidating in the beginning. There's a lot of silence. There's a lot of awkward waiting. I could tell you that I wanted to jump in and rescue people on our team, and I could feel Rick grabbing me on the arm. Do not rescue them. Let them think. And I mean, it was transformative. I will say that. Rick, in your book, you talk about these two things. It isn't just thinking in general. It's intentional thinking. And the two words that I love that jumped out at me was abundance thinking and possibility thinking. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that, kind of how you came to those two things?
So if you go back in history and time, you can find that the Jesuits and the great leaders said you must seek clarity first, because when you seek clarity, it gives you the opportunity to make wise choices. When you make wise choices, that can lead to happiness. It doesn't guarantee it, but it certainly improves the odds. So possibility thinking is what is the art of impossible, because you have to embrace that first and recognize that if you then have the habits and the systems, over time, one day you wake up and you've created a hockey stick growth curve. And it's just this idea that people get focused on the gap, what didn't get done, and they miss the gain. There's this whole back to celebration or wallowing. And that constant reminder as a leader that gets back to this whole leadership concept. And everybody wants to believe, well, I did everything right. How come it didn't work out? That was just bad luck. It's when you have a bad process and a good outcome, that is the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Well, I'll tell you this. We have a mutual friend, Lisa Tilley, and Lisa serves on our board and has been a sweet reminder for me often. She uses this phrase, the art of the possible. And we just remind ourselves on the things that we can see, that there's no limiting factors. The only limiting factors there are what we put on ourselves. We think that we can't do it. And when you begin to think you can't do it, you begin to manifest that. But when you begin to see the possible and see not just in the business, but in people, seeing the art and seeing the leadership in Hali even before she saw it, seeing the leadership in our emerging leaders even before that, you begin to project that art of the possible. And I will thank you for helping us go along that journey and helping our company. We're going to take a short break. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company whose mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. So, if you're interested in learning more about how we develop a people-centric culture, or if you're interested in a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, we're back on the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast with Rick Scruggs. Hali, I think you got a question for him.
I do. Rick, many business leaders often struggle with long-term planning. One, because it gets them out of their comfort zone, and two, because they are truly caught up in the day-to-day operations. What would your advice be for kind of taking a step back and taking a more strategic approach to succession planning?
Hali, you said it right there. Biggest issue with owners, especially Generation 1 or even Generation 2 teams, is they do not delegate and give opportunities to people who want more responsibility. But if I don't know all these tasks and things that I'm doing, I'm holding on to them. My good friend Michael Coffey used to say, you can have my responsibility or you can have my stock when you can pull it from my dead cold fingers. So delegation to allow other people to grow, because a leader must be focused on the mission, vision, and purpose of the organization. The strategies, tactics, and tools are what the team actually executes on.
So, Rick, when you're watching leaders, coaching leaders, even watching them in financial decisions, and I don't know, some you may get further into the nitty gritty than others, but what do you see is the difference between great leaders and when it comes to making financial decisions, whether it's for their personal career or business career? Is that just kind of the way you were brought up? Do you learn that over time? Does that just develop? What do you see as the difference makers there?
Well, the biggest piece is what I call governance, and having a board of either directors or a board of advisors that's not inclusive inside the organization, but involves either one or two outside board members, because you want board members who have an irrational interest in the success of the organization, but they're not yes people to the owner. And that is a really critical element that's missing, because most owners had an entrepreneurial seizure as Mike on Friday night, and they tell their spouse, and they go from working for 40 hours a week for somebody else to working 100 hours a week for themselves. And you can't get where you want to go by doing that. You have to let go of things. So, Hali, the idea would be to identify all the things you think you do as a leader or an owner, and every quarter delegate 70% of that to somebody else. And so that by the end of the year, you're focusing on the essential 3 or 4 things that are going to contribute the most to the organization. There's a gentleman we've recently met who said, we run a personal development company. We just happen to sell XYZ products. And his growth of his ESOP has gone from 26 million to 150 million in 5 years. It's just an incredible story. So I think, Billy, your leadership and what TFI has done is given opportunity for people to be not just, in the warehouse or just in sales or just in manufacturing. You've given people an opportunity to expand on their God-given talents.
Well, Rick, I'm just thinking about that 70% rule, and man, I wish I was that person who is able to do that. I love delegating. I love empowering and encouraging our leaders. But why is it that we hold on to that so hard instead of letting it go? I mean, if that letting go frees us to do what we need to be doing, why is it so hard?
Well, the acute sense of the obvious is never obvious, either due to fear or greed. And most entrepreneurs have never been coached. So if you haven't been coached, the first day I met my mentor, he asked me, "Are you coachable?" I said yes. I wasn't really sure I understood what I had said yes to, because immediately a week later, he started calling me at 5 a.m. asking me how my day had gone so far. And when you're living with a bunch of other friends who are 23 years old, they're going, "What in the world is going on?" And yet it's that person who's willing to set aside immediate gain or reward because they understand a vision of a future accomplishment is more important. But when you get so caught up in the day-to-day and not letting go, so for true leadership to take place and for an organization to grow, that the owners, the management team have to be coachable. They have to be open-minded because no one person has all the answers. A tremendous Charlie Jones once said, if you want to know where you're going to be in 5 years, it's going to be the books you read and the people you hang out with.
That's right. And I remember you saying that, and I remember that 70% rule too. And I remember I'm writing myself a note. I need to get back and examine that. So Rick, just kind of rapid fire as we kind of march towards the close here. We like to ask everybody that comes on the podcast, and I know you're a book reader. Haley, Rick used to send me a book a month. I don't know if he read them all, but he signed them and said, "You need to read this." Probably why I've developed such a hunger for reading. So Rick, just kind of what's on your bookshelf? What's by the bedside these days that you're reading?
Okay. The Art of Impossible by Steve Kotler, Kotler. I've just done a reread of James Clear, Atomic Habits. Benjamin Hardy's 10X is Easier Than 2X. The Gap or the Game by Dan Sullivan. Avoiding the Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. So it's just, my goal is to read, 2 to 3 books a month, and, you don't have to read them page to page. If it's not hitting you and you're feeling good about it, set it aside. What I've discovered, though, is sometimes the book that I set aside was the book I needed to finish.
And I'll tell you this, Rick, when we were reading Good to Great, and we've said this in here on our podcast several times and in other places, the Good to Great, one sentence, "Good is the enemy of great," is embedded way in the book. But that was the nugget that I needed, and I've carried that forward. So that's great advice. I knew that we would get a list of books, Haley, when I asked that question. So, Rick, just in personal leadership, if we were to pull somebody out of the hallways of your organization and said, "Tell us what kind of leader Rick is," how would they describe your leadership style?
They would say driven, purposeful, abundant, and willing to listen. Not always at that moment. I think great leaders discover, I hear what you're asking me. I understand it's important, but not until this afternoon or maybe tomorrow will it be appropriate because I can't give you your full attention right now. And when I don't do that, that's when I get myself caught in that drain, and we don't have that good outcome. Nassim Taleb wrote in a great book called Black Swan, and then he wrote his last that I read is called Anti-Fragile. He said, anybody can take a blow and survive. The question is, can you take the blow and actually grow? And I think in today's changing world of AI, we haven't brought that subject up. I'm sure you're going to be talking to a lot of people. I mean, it's coming. Microsoft invested $50 billion 18 months ago, and everybody thought that was a big number. A couple of weeks ago, it was $500 billion was the latest round. So it's impacting our lives. I just had a bunch of medical tests done on a health profile, and they fed all my results into AI, and it was just astounding. So, expect the best, plan for the worst, but be prepared to be surprised. I like that because that's how life works. God made the earth round so we can't see what's directly in front of us.
The thought of the black swan, Rick, I can remember for the years that we were together when you were working with us, we were talking about black swan events. And all of that stuff for Black Swan was theory, and then COVID hit. It was the very Black Swan event, the event that no one could anticipate, and then how companies survived, thrived, didn't in that event. I'm glad you brought that up. So, Rick, just kind of the last question, and we like to ask this of everyone, and he's someone who's made an impact on your journey. Tell us about that person. My original mentor, Chief Nesbitt, was probably the biggest thinker I ever met. And he was the gentleman who would start at the 5 a.m. call. And he was the one who one day told me, you can accomplish anything in life as long as you don't care who gets the credit. 10 years later, though, I looked at the back of his plaque. It said, however, keep a journal. But he was one of those impactful people. Dan Sullivan was another one of those strategic coach people that made a big difference. Paul J. Myers, the habit of goal setting, that was another winner. So it's these people that we listen to. Nancy Klein, that was introduced to me, my good friend David Kahn. It's this continuous input that you have to be open-minded to. You don't always have to agree, but at least give people the opportunity to speak their message. And now it's all about, you've heard the term pay it forward. I think it ought to be play it forward. We haven't used the word fun. We talked about celebration, but I think fun is as crucial part of this journey as anything else. Are you having fun? Not ha ha, laugh, laugh, but it charges you up. In the 6 habits, seeking clarity, generating energy, raising expectations, increasing productivity, developing influence. The one I love best is demonstrate courage. So Winston Churchill, never, never, never give up. Those are the people that have been great mentors, influencers in my life and in the lives of our clients. Well, I can say this as we end on influencers. I appreciate the influence that you've had on my life personally and the influence you've had on our company. Your fingerprints are all over this organization, and we've seen extraordinary growth and blessings because I believe of a lot of the hard work, a lot of decisions that we made early on that sort of got this ball rolling, and you were a huge part of that. So I want to thank you for that, and also want to thank you for taking a minute to be on our podcast today. Well, Billy and Hali, it's been a true honor and privilege to be here with you all. And I like to serve people who want to grow. And that's not everybody, and that's okay. However, at the end of the day, you want to know, did you make a difference? Did you impact somebody's life? And that's the greatest epitaph on your tombstone. Rick, how can people get in touch with you? Someone wants to reach out to you. How could they reach out? So F. Scruggs is an email at financialguide.com. You can go to our website, Financial Designs, or my cell is 434-665-1855. That's excellent. All right, Rick, we'll catch up with you soon. Thank you again. Real pleasure. Thank you all. Have a great day. All right, everyone, welcome back. What a great episode with Rick Scruggs, founder, CEO of Financial Designs. Hali, I'm not sure that I've ever seen both of us lean back when he said, no one tells me anything acronym. I thought I was going to have to stop and edit. I was laughing so hard because you were writing it as fast as he was putting it out there. But it's so true. When we get into trouble, when there's confusion and we're not clear, how much of a mess that causes. So that's my nugget. I'm stealing it. I'm not even going to give you a chance. No one ever tells me anything. Let us be clear. Let us create our vision, create a message around that, and then make it clear what we want to communicate. How about you?
I think Rick could have said the most profound thing after he said that, and we wouldn't have heard him because we were both just so focused on that. I thought it was a fantastic nugget. I really like time to think. I think it's simple. We often talk about heads up time, and sometimes that gets kind of lost in what it means. But truly, it does mean time to think. I really am interested to be a fly on the wall in one of those rooms and see people kind of get out of their comfort zone and really have both the physical and mental space to think.
Well, and we know sometimes when we're heads down, we're task oriented, but heads up, is when we're thinking about working on the business, not in the business. So Rick's one of those people, and I mean to tell you, he's worked with our team and he's been an incredible influence in our journey. So appreciate him joining us on the podcast. So I'm looking forward to the next episode already, Haley. But until then, tighten up.
Tighten up. Thank you for joining the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc. Our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our communities, and in our customers? Visit threadedfasteners.com. Thank you again for listening. I'm your co-host and producer, Haley Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duray.
This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.